You are one of very few independent thinkers on the internet at this point. There's kind of this pursuit of consensus over truth, which,
Yes.
as you and I probably agree on, is pretty stupid. Help me understand kind of the view of the world from somebody living outside the United States right now, given the pandemic that's going on and kind of the economic crisis. What's generally the view of the United States from your
Okay.
seat or kind of other people that you talk to over in Europe?
I think the consensus is I think the narrative. I think the narrative is that some countries, including the USA, I think the narrative is that they haven't handled this very well, and you get that from different angles, right? You have the people who are think there should have been more lockdowns and things should have been people should have just grabbed the reins of control and forced people to wear masks and forced lockdowns and instituted fines and stuff. And then you have the people who are, more libertarian minded, who are like, the lockdown was a disaster, destroyed the economy unnecessarily for a virus with a 99.9% survival rate. It didn't make sense to do this, to make all these people unemployed, etc. And, I can understand both of those perspectives. But I think what we're witnessing this year is just I think we're seeing sort of every interesting phenomenon in human psychology taking place, right? Cognitive dissonance, mob mentality, confirmation bias, like every, the politicization of things that shouldn't be politicized, people forming teams, tribalism, etc. We've seen all of this play out so much over the past few months. And I think that there are some things that are really, really obvious when it comes to the whole pandemic situation and the response to it that no one wants to even be honest about. And I can understand why certain people don't want to be honest about. I think one of those things is that nobody had a freaking clue, right? No one wants to just admit that, like, okay, like, just in January they were saying there's no human transmission. Right? They said masks don't work, don't wear masks, don't buy masks. And then they said, absolutely wear a mask. If you don't wear a mask, you're going to kill my grandma. They said that you can't go out and protest. But you remember they had the lockdown protests and people were clamping down on them. A couple weeks later, you've got thousands out in the streets, Black Lives Matter protests. And you even have health experts saying that it's okay because racism is a bigger virus. And the goalpost, they said flatten the curve. And then we flattened the curve, right? Just a couple weeks to slow the spread. That's how they got everybody to comply. That was months ago now, but the gyms are still closed, the churches are still closed, etc. They just keep moving the goalposts, and no one wants to admit, okay, we didn't know what was going on, and no one wants to admit, okay, perhaps we overreacted, and this wasn't as bad as we thought it would be. At the beginning, they were saying the death rate could be 3% to 5%. Now it turns out that if you are under the age of about 50 and you don't have big underlying conditions, your chance of survival is virtually 100%, right? You can look at the figures, you can see who this is impacting. If you're over the age of, 70 or so, 65, 70, yeah, absolutely. You want to be careful. You want to take more precautions. It would make sense to perhaps self-quarantine yourself, take additional measures. But no one wants to just admit any of this stuff. So people are still pretending that children are just as at risk as 80-year-olds, which is not true. They're trying to pretend that people like yourself and myself are just as at risk and need to take the same precautions as people in nursing homes, which we know is not true. We know so many things, but no one, because so many mistakes have been made and everyone's trying to score political points and do this and do that. I mean, even when it comes to the medical advice, even when it comes to the so-called experts, how many times have the experts been wrong, right? There are no experts because it takes time to become an expert. It takes years. There's no coronavirus experts, not for COVID-19, because it's new and it takes time to become an expert. So whatever is said needs to be taken with a massive grain of salt. And there are just so many people just have different dogs in the fights and no one wants to be honest and everyone is lying, from the media to the politicians to this to that. There's too many conflicting opinions and views, and everyone wants to win, and that's kind of the problem. And so, like, I don't talk about the pandemic a lot because it just gets people just get so freaked out and amped up. And I mean, you were asking before the call, like, what the situation is like where I live, and I was saying that the amount of cases and stuff throughout this whole thing has been, been very low. And it's not I don't live in an area that's been heavily impacted. I live by myself. I don't I've been socially distancing for a while, regardless, for the most part. And then like I had one day where I tweeted something about the fact that I don't wear a mask. And I got like people, you would have thought that I like admitted to like being a serial killer or something, the way people responded. And it's crazy because people don't even factor in the fact that like things are different in different parts of the world and in different places. So someone might be in a place that's heavily affected and everyone's wearing masks and whatever. I'm like, no one wears a mask here. Like it's not a thing. Like I can go outside, I can go to the park. There's thousands of people are out. People aren't even social distancing. No, it's like, well, it's not a heavily affected area. So the precautions here are not going to be the same as in New York City or even in London, etc. But the mask itself has even become like a tribal symbol. It's become it's become politicized. Now it's, if you don't wear a mask, you're a bad person and, we must force these people. The whole thing's it's just become farcical at this point. I think I've just kind of removed myself from the conversation, and it's just like, look, I'm just going to use common sense like I've been doing the whole time. I'm going to go about my business, look after my health, not try to put other people unnecessarily at risk, which I haven't been doing regardless of what people want to say.